In this lesson, we're shifting completely away from aggression and market orders. We're focusing now entirely on passive side of the auction, specifically the visible resting limit orders inside the order book. In the previous lesson, you've learned how to recognize executed urgency, who crossed the spread and transacted. Now we're looking at what those market orders are crossing into. We're observing the liquidity that sits in the book and either absorbs pressure or disappears when tested. Everything we examine here represents visible resting intent, not executed commitment. That distinction is critical and hope it is obvious at this point because market orders represent urgency that already happened. We're focusing now on limit orders that represent liquidity that is currently available but may or may not transact. So now let's dive into all the tools in Bookmap that represent the passive participants in the market or the limit orders. So let's start with the heat map. The heat map is the primary tool for visualizing visible resting limit orders across time. It displays liquidity that is currently published to the exchange order book. It does not show hidden orders like iceberg reserve quantities beyond the displayed size or off-book liquidity. It shows what is publicly visible and available at each price level. Now, the brighter areas on the heat map represent larger concentrations of visible limit orders, while dimmer areas represent thinner liquidity. So as price moves toward a liquidity level, several things can happen. Liquidity can remain and hold, it can reload and replenish, it can pull away at the last second right before price arrives, or it can get executed and consumed. The heat map itself does not tell you which of those outcomes will occur. It simply shows you where liquidity exists and how it behaves as price approaches and interacts with it. When we look at the settings for the heat map, we can see that at the top you have the color map settings, which is also in the top toolbar if the display on toolbar option is selected. Now to the right, you can see apply these settings globally if you would like. I do not adjust any of the advanced color map settings here. Down here, you will see the lower and upper cutoff percentages. The lower cutoff percentage setting is the same slider you have on the top toolbar up here. The upper cutoff percentage is usually set around 95%. This allows the top 5% of the order book liquidity levels to get the full heat intensity, giving you more visible contrast and making significant walls or clusters easier to spot in real time without having to wait for an extreme outlier to light up. Here, you see the option to select to have the lower cutoff slider on the toolbar. Now below that, we have the vertical smoothing settings of the heat map. This stays on auto so that the display adjusts naturally as we zoom in and zoom out. We avoid heavy smoothing because over smoothing can create the illusion of stable liquidity when in reality that liquidity may be dynamic or rapidly changing. The goal here is to have structural accuracy. Next, let's move to the order book. The order book shows a real-time snapshot of visible resting bid and ask liquidity around the current price. This is not historical data and it is not executed volume. It reflects what is sitting in the order book at the exact moment. The depth you see is aggregated visible liquidity at each price level. It represents all currently published limit orders at that level, but it does not identify individual traders. So when we open the settings, you can see you can name the title of that column here. So I have created two separate order book columns, one just for bars only and the other just for numbers only. You can have these in the same column. However, I can't really see the numbers when it's on top of the bars, so I have separated those into two different columns, but you're welcome to include both into one column. We enable both the bid and ask sides, and we also extend the depth beyond just the best bid and ask so that we can observe the broader structural positioning of liquidity. So at this point, you can start to observe the interactions on the order book as you watch market orders or the bubbles collide with resting liquidity on the heat map and how the order book reacts there. You want to begin noticing where liquidity is stacking, where it's thin, how quickly is it changing, whether size persists as price approaches, and whether it disappears under pressure. Now, let's take a look at the order book imbalance. You can see it sits above the volume balance indicator in the top right corner here. The order book imbalance compares the relative size of resting bids versus resting asks near current price. It tracks imbalances between buying and selling interest visible in the order book, meaning the order book is heavily weighted to one side near price. For the order book imbalance settings, we set the price range to include the first 10 price levels from the best bid and ask. This defines the active liquidity zone that the indicator uses to calculate the imbalance. We also enable the half-life weighting and set it to 7 price levels. This means liquidity closer to current price has the strongest influence on the imbalance reading, while liquidity farther away gradually has less influence. This is important because liquidity near price is the liquidity that can actually interact with incoming market orders. So liquidity farther away is less relevant and may never be reached. So by reducing the influence of distant liquidity, the indicator gives a more accurate representation of the true balance between buyers and sellers at the levels that actually matter. So this is preventing the distant liquidity from distorting the reading and ensures that the imbalance reflects real, actionable market structure near price. Next, let's look at the large lot tracker. The large lot tracker shows when one participant is dominating the liquidity at a specific price level. When this happens, Bookmap displays a vertical white marker at the price level in the order book column. This tells you that most of the visible liquidity at that level is coming from one large limit order rather than many small orders. So this allows us to see if any of these liquidity levels sitting on the books could be a big player in the market. Now let's look at the settings. We set the minimum percentage at price level to 60%, and this ensures that the order must clearly dominate that level before it appears. And we also set the minimum percentage in the order book to 20%, and this is ensuring that the order is meaningful relative to the overall order book, not just locally dominant. These settings help us filter out any noise and ensure only significant large participants are shown. And that is it for all the tools we use to see the passive side of the market or the resting liquidity in the market. So in the next lesson, we're going to be going over the structural tools that we'll be using inside of Bookmap.